In this video, I share with you what I learned after 5 years in business school, and hopefully you can use what I share if you've considered starting a business and is wondering, is it worth it to go to university? Or if you're just wondering if university or business school in particular is the right thing for you. My name is David Michelson. I've started the Discipline Group, and my mission is to make entrepreneurship available to everyone. I know it's a spacious goal. I help aspiring entrepreneurs start a business, and I guarantee they get their first $1,000 in 90 days, even if they don't have any experience. And I make these videos to share my journey of starting this business and to help more people start their own businesses. And so this video in particular is about sharing what I've learned after 5 years in business school. I first did 3 years in my bachelor, which was a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration and Information Systems. And then I did 2 years, which I'm finishing now, in a Master of Science in Business Administration and Information Systems. And the short way to say that is just business and IT. For some reason, they give the degrees or the programs these fancy names. But in short, both degrees are about organizational understanding, business economics, and how IT impacts a company. And so before I tell you about all the things I learned during those 5 years, the first 5 people who comment startup down below will get a free hour of coaching or mentorship, or if you're already trying to start a business and you would just like some help in doing so. And so across all the things I learned from these 5 years, I'll share what were the personal developments, what were because of the courses, what were things I don't feel like I learned, which would have helped me as an entrepreneur, knowing that I wanted to start a business. And then at the end, what you can use all this experience for in making your decision. Maybe this is you. For a lot of people considering going into uni who are young, don't really know what they want to spend their time doing, what their future is going to look like, or what they want to work with. And this might be you. You might watch this video as part of that reason. But what I found in the whole question of can I figure out what it is that I want to work with or what it is that I want to do is that it's not something that you can think your way out of. What I've found for myself and many of the friends and people in my network that I've talked to is that you just have to get started and try stuff and then see what works and what doesn't work. In Denmark, we are so lucky that our university education is paid by the state. And so you don't really have high consequences in starting a degree and either, dropping out or switching to another one. And it's not like the college system where you just pick your courses according to what major you want. You kind of apply for a specific program or degree, which then already has all the courses pre-planned most of the time anyway. And so for me specifically, going into business and IT kind of confirmed some of the preconceived ideas I had of what my interests were about business, about entrepreneurship, about IT. When I was young, I thought I was going to be a software developer. That's never going to happen, I think. But going into business and IT definitely confirmed that business and specifically entrepreneurship within business is what I wanted to pursue and to do. And so that was the first lesson. Now, the second personal development was when you go to university, when you show up and you pick all your classes or your courses and you have to go to class on time, you learn to show up. This skill of consistency is incredibly valuable because being consistent either with showing up or doing some other kind of work is actually immensely necessary if you're thinking about starting a business, for instance, because you will need to keep going over and over even if you don't get any results. And so showing up on time, even if you don't think it's that important for classes, can actually be a big contributing factor to you keeping the promises you make to yourself and being able to stick out the daily routine. Thirdly, what I learned was completing work before set deadlines. So having a bunch of exams, having a bunch of assignment, homework you need to do. You learn to kind of plan your work, hopefully get started in advance. I know this is a point where many people vary, but then work on things and hand them in before the deadline. Now, I have read my way to understanding that most deadlines can be moved and don't really matter. It's not something I have extensive experience with myself, but at least at uni, if you don't hand in before the deadline, either you can maybe take a SIG exam or otherwise you just fail basically. So you kind of have to learn that you need to hand in your stuff if you want to get the degree. Again, consistency. Now, the next personal development I learned from my time at uni is practicing public speaking. And I'm so fortunate that I've had this opportunity in a variety of ways. I've had it in, raising my hand and participating in discussions during class. I've had it because the degree that I was taking had a lot of oral exams where you draw a topic and then you have a conversation about that topic. And thirdly, I've been an instructor, it's called, or a teaching assistant, which basically meant that for what you could consider maybe lab work or exercises for a course, I would help do all of the more practical stuff. And having to talk in front of another class definitely helps you practice speaking, just as in a simple way, but also how you present. And that's an incredibly valuable skill, I think. Now, the next personal development I learned from going to university for all this time is increased independence and confidence, but it's more a byproduct of going to university. And so the increased independence and the increased confidence actually come more from moving out on my own and having to live by myself. You're kind of forced to then adapt, right, and grow. But also going on exchange twice, first to Singapore and later to the US. And again, having to be by your own in completely new environments where you don't know anything, you don't know anyone, and you just have to figure everything out. Why is that important? Well, the independence you gain and the problem solving ability you gain from that is incredibly useful just in your everyday life, because you believe that you can solve problems, which raises your ambition and motivates you to take on bigger problems and bigger tasks in life. But also specifically in terms of entrepreneurship, it increases your self-belief that you can solve big problems, even though they might seem scary or daunting. And your threshold for pain also expands, and the likelihood that you'll keep going for a longer time, even if you're not getting those results, will increase. Another quite simple thing I got or was taught by going to university for this long was the social aspect or the networking aspect. You have a huge opportunity to meet a vast different pool of people, and this allows you to make new friends. It allows you to make business connections or job connections. It allows you to look for romantic partners. Essentially, you're meeting a lot of both different people who are quite likely to be of high intellect and worth knowing more about. But also it just raises your social skills if you choose to be part of those social situations. And it can be a good way to create more like-minded relationships or like-minded friendships compared to people who you might be friends with from previous periods in your life. And so I briefly already mentioned the exchange I went on. The exchange just in and of itself was hugely eye-opening, both culturally, all the opportunities I had, the holidays I took, what I learned about myself, how I grew, the ability to go on exchange and not just go on holiday in another country, but actually be part of a highly educated part of that country and kind of see how everybody lives their lives and what the education is like is an unrivaled opportunity that you don't get many other places or in many other ways. The next thing I learned is how to write academically and precisely. And so as far as I can remember, I've always been a fan of writing and writing well, writing descriptively, nuanced. But when you're writing a lot of papers or reports, you kind of learn that you have to write in an academic fashion and in a way that is precise and accurate without basing it on your personal opinion, what you think, your perspective, or other biases. And so a natural follow-up to that is the understanding of what research actually is and maybe more importantly, what research means to a society. Because on one hand, I've learned that universities definitely research stuff that in the short term maybe isn't that valuable to society in general. But on the other hand, you have some universities, some degrees, some programs that research stuff that is incredibly helpful to society. Think stuff like medicine, energy, sustainability, meta studies of how companies can stop destroying value when they merge. Some of these things, right? And of course, there's a huge difference, but especially in a time where maybe some research is looked down upon, it's been helpful to kind of reflect upon and realize that a lot of research is actually incredibly useful and helpful and necessary in order to advance society, in order to contribute to innovation, and not just the innovation coming from companies, but also these research facilities. The second last personal lesson is the importance of education in general. I come from a country, Denmark, where the general level of education is pretty high. And it is that way because education is free, or even though nothing is free, it is state paid, right? And so the result of that is that most people have quite a high level of education. People in general have quite decent jobs. And one of the main things it contributes to is the reduction in divide between people. And so whether you like that or not, it simply means that everyone in the society becomes more equal because there's less of a difference in what you learn, and following that, what you can apply in the workplace. And so this has been a long stint, I know, bear with me, but the last point is, having been through university and learned all these personal development things, it's increased my capacity to stay focused for longer periods of time. Preparing for exams where you maybe spend 5 or 7 days just completely focused, researching topics, reading up on stuff, forces you to really be prepared. And that capacity to stay focused on those multiple hours at a time is definitely something that's helping me in my entrepreneurial journey right now, and I know will continue to aid me in my career moving forward. These were all my personal lessons that I've learned from being at university, but not relating to specific courses that I've taken. And so the next section is what I've learned from actually taking the courses and the subjects. And so course or subject wise, I've learned 3 things. As having been at business school for 5 years, at least when you're taking a Bachelor of Science or a Master of Science, in my eyes, there are 3 things you learn. You learn subject awareness, you learn concept awareness, and you learn risk awareness. And these are 3 descending levels of detail in terms of the subject that you concern yourself with. And so to give you an example, I've had courses on change management, I've had courses on network infrastructure, I've had courses on AI, on big data, I've had courses on organizational change, IT project management. And these courses at the top level are what I would call subject awareness. It is introducing you to something that is called project management or IT project management, and what that is in and of itself, that subject. That is an area wherein you can learn something. The next level is concept awareness, and what they do at uni is they teach you, okay, in IT project management, well, we have different concepts for different ways you can run projects. That might be the old school waterfall model. And so the waterfall model is a concept in and of itself. It might be agile ways of working, like Scrum, for instance, or SAFe, or other ways of working. Those are concepts. And so in the course, you might learn about that concept and how it theoretically works or is structured. Now, the lowest, the deepest level is risk awareness. And the reason I say that is because in uni, and especially in business school, most of these courses will teach you, okay, this is the way the theory is supposed to work, but then real life happens. And then all you can really consider is, how do we minimize the risk in this? So for instance, in IT project management, if you're using a Scrum method to manage or run a project, okay, when things go wrong, how do you manage that? How do you both decrease the likelihood that a risk occurs, but also how do you reduce the potential impact of that risk? And it could be in accounting, for instance. How is accounting supposed to be, and what happens when something is not in a way that it is supposed to be? Could be in IT. You learn about how a network is supposed to work, but what are all the downsides and what you need to be aware of? What is encryption? You get a very deep sense of subject awareness, but, and this is where the comma is, my understanding is, if you're not taking a hands-on degree, such as being a lawyer, an accountant, a doctor, in general, you learn courses that teach you the need for X or blank, insert whatever topic you want to learn about, but you don't learn the application of that course. So let's take IT project management again. You might learn about IT project management, what it is, how it's supposed to work, what are risks, how should you handle it, but you don't get any practical application of how it actually works. You're not assigned to a company where your duty is to do project management. And so you don't get hands-on experience based on the theories that you've been taught. Now, whether you like that or whether you don't like that, doesn't really matter. This is just what I learned from that. Finally, course-wise and being an instructor or a teaching assistant, the final thing that I learned is just how much better you learn yourself, or how I learn myself, when I am teaching other people. And I don't remember if it was, I think it's Richard Feynman, who said that one of the best ways to kind of get a feel for how well you understand a subject is how well or how simple you can communicate and explain that subject or teach it to someone else. And so for me, it's been a huge lesson understanding that if I cannot teach a subject or a concept to someone else, then my understanding of it is very vague. And so what we've been through so far were all my personal developments, It was what I learned from the courses. And so I haven't really included, what many of the courses were actually about, because the courses in and of themselves I could list and then you could just look them up, and then that wouldn't add much value. But I'm kind of trying to make this more centered around, do you want to go into learning these things? What will you be made aware of? What is the usefulness of it? And so the actual course matter is, of course, only relevant to my degree. Whereas if you're considering going into another degree, that would be completely irrelevant. And so that's why I've only focused on the major lessons and not the specific details of the courses. Now, as someone who went into uni with a preconceived idea that I wanted to start a business and become an entrepreneur, and very quickly confirmed that preconceived notion and decided and later committed to wanting to start a business and is now starting a business, here are some of the things that going into uni, going into business school, spending 5 years did not teach me that I would have liked that it taught me. The first point is, business school, in short, does not teach you what you need to start a business. There are, of course, exceptions. You might have a few courses that can give you some idea about what you need, but they usually don't fulfill the second point, which is how to start a business, because there's no actual hands-on coursework that forces you to take an idea and start it and try and run with it. Thirdly, business school doesn't teach you how to operate or run a business. You might have courses, as I said, on organizational change management, IT project management. But when you don't have any applicability for those courses, you don't get any sense of what it's like to use those things in a real world setting with real world challenges and people who don't follow what you tell them to do. Fourthly, you might have economics classes, you might have other business classes that describe what cost or revenue or profit and all of these things are. But going to business school very rarely will teach you how to reduce costs or how to increase revenue, or in general, just create profitability. It might make you aware of the need to be profitable, or what costs in general are, what revenue is, or what sales is, but it won't teach you how to do those things, or how to reduce the cost, how to increase sales. And I would have liked that. So the fifth point is that, in short, business school, in my experience, and this is both my experience in Copenhagen, in the US at Duke Fuqua, and at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, it is that business school does not give you the hard skills you need to identify the need or the problem you solve, choose a customer, reaching out to those customers, making your first sales, and getting started with a business. Nor does it teach you, if you are in a business that is running, how do I actually keep it running and even make it excel and turn from good to great, for instance. Maybe I had high expectations. At this point I've learned, but if that is a deal breaker for you, then maybe it is not the right thing for you. Now, as I've mentioned, there are a few caveats to this whole explanation and this whole story. You see, I've mentioned, that I've studied in Copenhagen in Denmark. And as I said, education is paid by the state here in Denmark. But also you get paid by the state when you go to university, meaning that you actually get paid every month a certain amount. And for a lot of people, that covers quite a big part of their rent or otherwise living expenses. And so there's a huge incentive to actually go into education and to study and to take a higher education, both bachelor's and master's degree. And so there are not that high consequences for going in and taking an education because you don't have to pay for it. And the costs of switching to a different education or stopping are equally low. Taking a look at the conclusive question, should you go to university? Should you go to business school? Do you want to start a business? What should you do with your life, right? And I'm sorry, but the short answer is it depends. There's no real answer to this. These were all my experiences. I think in general, you learn a lot about being an independent adult, and it's very likely that your network can increase and that your independence and confidence and ability of consistency and persistence will increase by going to university. But it is not to say that you couldn't get those things from having a job or having a part-time job and trying to start a business next to doing that. I think it also depends heavily on where in the country that you either live or are considering going to university. For instance, if you're in the US and you have to pay for college, and it's incredibly expensive some places, then if it was me, I would probably try and find other ways you could have a job and then still have time to start a business. If you know you want to start a business, But otherwise, if you're somewhere in the EU where maybe you don't have to pay for your education, then maybe it's a great way for you to get some kind of education. And you know that once you get that education, at least you can go get a job, and then you could still work on your business next to that and go full-time with that when you make it work. There's no one definitive answer to this. The only real question I can give you is, if I were to go back and make the decision again, knowing now that I want to start a business and how to do it, would I still do it? And the answer is probably yeah. Because of the specific circumstances where I'm at, I would probably go, and then maybe I just wouldn't attend the same number of classes and focus more on making the business work and spend less time at school. But, I would utilize the fact that I can get a free education and be paid at the same time. And so I think you should look at what are the options for where you're at. So the price of the education, what are the chances that getting that education will give you the kind of career afterwards that you want? Does it give you the kind of network that you want? If you were to get a job instead, how would that career progression look like? How long would it likely take? Could you just spend the same 5 years, 4 years, 6 years in a job and progress through that and be at a better place afterwards? Could you take a part-time job and start a business immediately and then grow through that? You have to realize that it depends on the goal that you're trying to achieve. So while it's a very vague final answer, I hope you can use some of these questions to kind of guide your own decision and at least build on the experience that I've shared, have a better idea of what it is that you're going into and whether or not those are the kind of years that you want to have yourself. Please let me know in the comments what you liked about this video, or if you didn't like it, if there are any similar kinds of videos about university versus entrepreneurship you would like to see. As always, of course, thank you for watching and stay disciplined.